Welcome to another episode of Global Insights in Professional Security. This is the program where we discuss how security interfaces with big topics such as business, law, the media, leadership, public health, and other top issues of the day. Today, we're going to focus on security and its relationship with law enforcement. And that's a very important relationship. Goes back to, well, security predates law enforcement, so it goes back quite a long ways, and it's a key consideration today: public-private partnerships. I'm honored today to welcome Paul Goldenberg to the show. Paul was recently recognized by Security Magazine as one of the most influential people in security for 2020. That's quite an honor. Paul started his career as a law enforcement officer and an undercover agent in New Jersey and in Florida, and he climbed the ranks quickly. He now runs Cardinal Point Strategies, a strategic advisory and consulting firm dedicated to assisting private and public sector organizations with navigating complex risks, identifying real-world solutions, and managing implementation. Paul is a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Advisory Council. He has served as the co-chair of the National DHS Foreign Fighter Task Force, vice chair of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Faith-Based Council, and I've had the honor of working with him in a small capacity there. And he's a member of the department's Combating Violent Extremism Working Group. More recently, he was appointed as chair of the DHS Cyber Security Task Force and as a member of the Foreign Influence Subcommittee. Paul, welcome. That's quite a pedigree.
Thank you, Mike. I think what I'm most proud of is the fact that I've had the opportunity for several decades. I'll age myself to be a part of the law enforcement profession, which has been a great honor and a privilege. And unfortunately, in these challenging times, my fellow professionals are going through some very challenging times right now. But thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. I've followed your work for quite a while, and I've had the opportunity on a few occasions, as you know, to work closely with you. We presented together in Atlantic City on a faith-based program, and that was very enlightening, meeting faith leaders and leaders in security for faith-based institutions. And you're doing great work there. Tell us about your policy-making roles in law enforcement and how you work with private security.
Well, look, up until really, it's just the last decade that private security has held such a distinguished place and role in public safety. You know, several decades ago, when I ran an intelligence unit, when anyone asked me if I was sharing information with the private sector, if I was sharing information with security directors of malls or security directors of large corporations, I would look at them astonished and go, "Are you kidding?" No, it was just perception, and that was pre 9/11, and 9/11. We go going back now almost 20 years. Even with 9/11, 9/11 has taught us a lot. As we all know, and as many of you have heard time and time again, 80 to 90% of the infrastructure of this great country is under the tutelage or under the supervision of the private sector, and that's private sector security or private sector groups. So to not leverage the capability to share information real time. Uh, we saw the outcome prior to 9/11, and since that time, working together with the private sector, with the private sector security firms and groups, we have seen another outcome, which has been much more positive, which has been a much more a better protected nation and people.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that you wouldn't share information. You couldn't trust them, or maybe they weren't. You think they were capable of using the information, but from the security side, I've been in private security since 1994, so well in advance of 9/11. And I remember working on a lot of public-private initiatives, and the private sector didn't want to share it with the public sector either because one, they weren't sure whether what was going to happen to it. Um, Two,
Mm.
they didn't want to reveal what could be sensitive or proprietary information that their competitors could get a hold of.
Yeah.
Three, they didn't want the information to be used for regulatory purposes. And there were a couple other reasons that they didn't they didn't think they were going to get anything back for it, so it went both ways. Like, so I'm hoping that we've had an entente or a détente or a thaw in relations, and we're more able to share, especially since so many security professionals come from law enforcement over the years. I think that's had to have uh, molded the relationship or made it better, since the two sides are, if you have one foot in private and one foot in public, you should be able to relate, understand what the other needs to do and how they can use that information.
Who's the first responder? Who's really the first responder? The first responder has been the security guard, the security officer. Go
Exactly.
to a mall, go to a religious institution, go to a food store. The challenge is, though, it's not just the fault of the industry. It's really more than the fault of the industry. If people want to pay pennies on a dollar, and they're going to pay for the lowest bidder when you're seeking to secure your facility, you're going to get what you pretty much pay for. So, with that said, at the same time, the first responders, they're ill-equipped, they're ill-trained, and again, it's not their fault. They're ill-regulated. There's no regulation. I mean, you go across the 50 states, and in some cases, you're putting guns into the hands of security officers. They're now pretty much playing the same role as a police officer who has, in some cases, 8 months to 12 months training and continued training thereafter. That's not a good place to be in as a nation right now. You know, we are leaving the safety and the security of our children, of our faith-based institutions, and of our infrastructure, unfortunately, into the hands of people who are not properly trained, and it's not their fault. It's the resources that we don't put in to the industry itself. Look, um, most policing agencies, they try to share with the private sector, but there's not a lot of training. There's not a lot of cross training. Who's trained? It's the police officers that are trained, as it should be. But I'll say it again: if something goes down at a mall, if something goes down at a religious institution, it's going to be the security officer that's going to be the first responder. And these officers just are not equipped. And that is a big problem. We really need the federal government, and I say proudly, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has done a great job in trying to build capacity with the private sector. They built fusion centers for the purpose of sharing information real time. They built ISACs, information sharing analysis centers, to share with the private sector. But at the same time, that information is not making its way down to the security officer that's making less than minimum wage, and he or she are the ones that are responsible for protecting our kids,
Right.
or our elders, or ourselves. So we need to look at the models. Sweden has exceptional models. Israel has exceptional models. We need to put resources, money, and training into private sector security. And quite frankly, I think I'm going to rattle some cages here. The industry does a great job itself in self-regulating. A lot of the associations out there, as is aside, which I think very highly of. The ASIS has done a great job in this area, but there are other associations out there that have not fought hard enough, I think, to for their officers, from the standpoint of compelling the federal government to tuck away the resources and the funding so they can they can provide this directly to the private security in a more regulated and in a more sustainable and in a more formalized manner.
Yeah, I think part of it is they're afraid of mandates, regulation, and things that will drive up costs and threaten the sort of the low bid uh, edge. So you said a bunch of things I wanted to comment on. I'll limit it to two. Those are very good points. One is a little tangential, but it's quick, and I'll start with that. You said we get what we pay for with the with officers, going with lowest bid and untrained, and that's true. And this is a little political aside. We also get what we vote for. Um, we complain that Congress is gridlocked and that they're all a bunch of idiots, depending on what side you're on. That these people are bad, these other people are bad or corrupt, and we complain about them. And confidence in Congress, every time you look at the data, it's an all-time low. But we voted for them, so they reflect us as a nation. We're just as divided and maybe as incompetent as Congress is. You have to, it's governed by the people for the people. We vote for them anyway. That it just triggered that. You don't have to comment on it. The other thing is,
I won't.
yes, it's just a general comment, nothing about either party. We worked on a project together. You were talking about standards and guidelines again. We worked on a project together that I'm proud of. We co-wrote an op-ed for the Dallas Morning News on the unintended consequences of defunding the police and the burden that puts on private security. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Sure. Look, as these calls to defund the police remove the very much needed resources from the police, and to kind of Robin Hood it, I guess, in the minds of some of the politicians, and give it to other sectors of I won't even say society, but other sectors of government entities. It's a very dangerous move. We are if we continue down this path of not only defunding the police, but we are really disenfranchising the police. We I don't know if the public is starting to understand exactly what the unintended consequences are going to be here. Call 911 and let's see who may or may not show up. Retention for police is an issue now. When I took the test to become a police officer, there were 1,000 to 1,500 people for every one position. Even up until 5 6 years ago, and when I started, it was a very different job to where it is today. Look, the majority or many police executives are educated. They have college degrees, master's degrees. Where I come from in New Jersey, the hierarchy of the New Jersey State Police and others, a lot of them have some of them have PhDs. It's changed, and I'm not gonna sit here and defend an entire profession that nothing has been done wrong. You have a million people, and it's almost like an actuary that determines how many people may pass away to support the insurance industry. Unfortunately, there are going to be some bad apples, but the majority of this profession today, yesterday, and tomorrow, they go into this for the right reasons. They go into this because they want to help society, they want to do the right thing, and sometimes things can go wrong. We need to do a better job at determining what officers may go in a direction that either needs to be turned around, or they need to be separated from the department. So that's on one side of the equation, where the profession is going to be, I believe, has their heart into working harder to try to better the conditions for their officers, so their officers can go out and do what they need to do to better secure the public safety. If we and I maybe I digressed a bit, but if we continue down the path of defunding, which I see some are backing off because I think the light bulbs are going off, that for those at the city councils that want to defund the police, that decide that if they themselves and the safety of their loved ones are in harm's way and they call 911 and nobody's showing up, well, then maybe they need to rethink this a little bit.
Right.
So Who would we rely on? We would rely on security officers that, again, I'll go back to where I started, unfortunately, are not properly trained, ill trained, totally, in some cases, not trained at all. And would they, in fact, become the first responders to a 911 call because there may not be anybody else? So the op ed really was to say, look, uh, we have as they say, a sharp edge on both sides of the knives. We want to cut the resources to policing, which is a very, very bad move. We should put more money into training our police, and I know that they're welcome, that they would welcome that. And at the same time, we need to also say to ourselves, we need to provide resources to the security professionals vis-a-vis through I don't want to say regulation, but we need to establish a infrastructure within the federal government. It could be DHS, it could be some other agency that becomes the provider to additional formalized resources to security professionals and the security industry, and we need to set standards. People hate that term, setting a standard. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you are in a synagogue, a church, a mosque, a temple, if you're sending your children to school, if you drop your kids off on a Saturday night at the mall, just remember that the first responder that's going to evacuate your child, that's going to possibly resuscitate your child, or is going to respond to an active shooter could potentially be a minimum wage security guard that has never received any training.
Well, that's why, I guess it's sort of it reflects your point. Houses of worship with means are hiring off-duty police officers. Those are they're getting scooped up. If you can afford that, that's the gold standard. And then after that, I know the house of worship I belong to has uses uh, off-duty law enforcement officers, sometimes supplemented by an unarmed security officer. But the unarmed security officer pretty much just keeps his eye out on things while the officers patrol and are more active. So, but no, you're absolutely right about that.
I just said, you just made a statement. You said keeps an eye on things.
Mm-hmm.
I challenge, I challenge folks out there to ask the security vendor how many of their unarmed security guards have gone through 5 minutes of what's called SARS training. Do they know what a suspicious activity is? Do they know how to report it? Do they know how to evac? Do they know what egress means? Look, the reality is the same officer that was sitting at an empty warehouse at an Amazon depot or a food depot or a steel mill and guarding that infrastructure tomorrow is in a mall or is now become the primary the primary safety officer for a religious institution, which today we all know religious institutions are under and have been under attack. We have people that are fully armed with military weaponry in full military fatigues that are storming our houses of worship here. And who is the first responder? Who is the guard? It's a potentially minimum wage officer that has not been properly trained. And I keep saying it again and again. It is not their fault. It is not their fault. So, Mike, I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah,
It just,
I agree. It's it's market forces. It's what it's what the customers demanding, and it's what the companies are providing because the economics force that model. So I agree with you. I wanted to pivot right now to a slightly different topic, which is disinformation. I know you're involved in monitoring disinformation. You've worked with private security and law enforcement in that area. fighting everything from QAnon and their campaign of kind of loony conspiracy theories to Russian bots. Can you tell us about the work that you're doing there and how it benefits security and law enforcement and how security and law enforcement can assist?
Yeah, a lot of my work, as you know, Michael, I'm a senior fellow with the Rutgers University Miller Center. I also am working very closely with the University of Ottawa, so we really do have a North American footprint, and we are a part of a consortium with the Swedish National Police as well. Look, the disinformation. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody heard it, right? I mean, right now that's what we're dealing with the security and law enforcement folks. The security folks, and even the sophisticated law enforcement agencies, and it's not again they have so much they have to contend with, but some don't realize or have come to realize that why would a Russian uh, a sophisticated Russian operation want to poke at a small city in Utah or Colorado or Kansas, or poke at a police chief or a police department, and it's almost unthinkable, you know. So it's really about thinking globally and acting locally. The disinformation campaigns coming out of state nations has been extremely dangerous. They have been seeking to create chaos. They have been seeking to pit people against each other for political reasons, racial, anti religious. I can go on and on and on, and they've been pretty successful. Um, we are working with the what's called the NCRI, the Network Contagion Research Institute, originally out of Princeton, now with us at Rutgers University. And this young group of scientists, neuroscientists, and senior analysts have created AI and technology to really be able to kind of digest the sentiment out there, and how that sentiment changes on the dime, predicated on the disinformation at the time. People are some. I've seen some people act smug with QAnon, like, oh, it's QAnon, it's a conspiracy theory. Hey, look, 1928. There were a lot of conspiracy theories that were going on abroad, and it rose up. A nation rose up. We are in a very, very dangerous time. Social media is like the tale of two cities, Michael. It's the best of times, and it's the worst of times. And unfortunately, there's some really bad actors out there that are leveraging social media for some very, very bad effect. They are seeking to create chaos. So why does a local police chief or even a security company need to care? Because the disinformation we have seen has led to civil unrest, has led to riots, has led to people being called out on the streets for one group to attack another group. And even a good security company needs to understand the impact of disinformation and what it can have on their officers and on their mission at hand. They need to be thinking about training people within their organizations, whether it's a 100 man woman organization or whether it's an organization that has 10,000 officers. They need to be tracking and monitoring the same way I did. Look, I'll age myself again. 30 something years ago, when I was involved in the gang units here in New Jersey, we looked at the graffiti on the street to determine what the temperature and the climate was on the street. The graffiti told us a story, and we actually trained officers in understanding that graffiti. And others questioned that. Why are you training officers to read graffiti? Really? We are graffiti times 100,000 when it comes to social media, and we need to understand how the impact of social media on us as a society.
I like that, comparing graffiti, one person on a wall scrolling something, a code, and to comparing it to social media, which could be thousands of people scrolling all sorts of things on the public wall that anyone can access, going out to millions and millions of people. I like that analogy. One last question before we wrap up. I know everybody, the the people who fall into QAnon and conspiracy theories, it's not just a lunatic fringe or whatever. It's not just one sector of society. It cuts across. So there's a lot of people from all walks of life, including security and police. And there are security and police who buy into this. How do we address that? And what kind of danger does that pose?
Well, look, um, anyone that looks up on YouTube where we go one, we go all pledge should get a chill down their spine, and if they don't, that concerns me. You will see every single American color, religion, soccer moms, soccer dads, coaches, teachers, educators, doctors, lawyers, military people, families pledging to QAnon. And anyone that looks deep into the QAnon conspiracy theories, it is a frightening situation. So really, we really need to look. People, I'll close by saying this: people used to go to the town square to exchange information and try to get facts. People went to the newspapers. People went to radio, ultimately television, when we had just a few networks out there, and the networks were actually doing their job and reporting the news instead of commentary. We're in a very dangerous place with that as well.
Yeah,
So, look, the we really need to build more communities of trust. People need to know that they can go somewhere for information that is being propagated based on fact or facts as we know them versus commentary. And we've lost our way when it comes to commentary and providing fact. And I have to tell you, the outcomes have not been pretty in the last 300 years of our history when chaos is fermented by 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 news and facts that are not real and not correct. I'll close on that. We've got to be very careful. QAnon is not going away. Actually, unfortunately, I think even after January, what is it? What is the date for the transition?
20th.
20th. Yeah, this isn't a political statement, but I think things are going to get pretty challenging for us as a society. And as a society, we have a perfect storm with the pandemic, with social media, with the incivility of where we are with politics. We've got to look back at history and take a look at how societies have unfolded so quickly, and ensure that that does not happen to us here in this country. And we're scapegoating, which people scapegoat, and we're scapegoating our law enforcement communities. Everyone's blaming law enforcement. Law enforcement, it's the cops' fault. It's this. That is not going to go well for us as a society either. That doesn't mean that law enforcement doesn't do everything it can to try to better itself, which I believe it will. But police officers are dying out on the streets there based on misinformation and disinformation, and it's very disheartening. As our law enforcement officers go down, so will the rest of society. And I'll end on that.
Well, on that resounding and sobering note, we're going to have to wrap it up. But Paul, thank you so much for your fabulous wisdom and analysis. It's been a real pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for yes, thank you. And folks, see you next time on Global Insights and Professional Security.